Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about operations involving negatives. And when I say operations, I mean the pretty standard addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Now, we all know how to do that just with our regular old positive numbers. But sometimes when you throw a negative in there, it can get a little more difficult, especially in addition and subtraction, if you throw that negative as the second number in the expression. So let's go over some examples and talk about what exactly happens in each of these scenarios. So let's begin with addition. Let's say we want to add 5 plus -3. Now it looks kind of weird because we have two mathematical signs right next to each other, right? Plus and minus. So a lot of times you actually may see it written like this: 5 plus a -3. The reason that we write it in parentheses, the reason it looks like that, is so that we can denote that the minus sign, the negative, actually goes with the 3, and it's not just some weird typo of a lot of operation signs in between our numbers. But what happens here is a little bit confusing. Do we add 5 and 3? Do we subtract? What do we do? Well, here's what I like to think. Anytime, whether it is addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division, if you have two different signs next to each other, then what ultimately ends up happening is subtraction or negative numbers, or however you want to think that. You ultimately end up with a negative sign or a minus sign, kind of synonyms, right? But if you have two of the exact same sign next to each other, what happens is it turns into a positive sign, or it turns into adding, also synonyms. So here's the deal. If we are adding a negative, this ultimately turns into subtraction. This is the exact same thing as saying 5 minus 3, because we're saying that what we are giving to the 5, or what we're adding to the 5, is actually 3 that we're kind of taking away. So it's kind of like, I don't know, whenever I had a birthday and my dad was like, you're no longer on your phone plan, so here's this phone that you're going to have to pay $45 a month for. Well, was it really giving me something if it costs something every month, right? It almost feels like we're actually subtracting from my total wealth as a high school student. But that's the idea, right? That adding a negative actually means we're going to subtract. And again, the idea is that if we have two different signs right next to each other, then ultimately the sign that you are going to want to use is the minus sign or a negative sign, however you want to think about it. So here we would just get 2. Now let's think about subtraction on a similar problem to this. Let's say we had 5 minus -3. And again, I'm going to write that -3 in parentheses. Every number we use today that's negative, I'm going to write in parentheses. So we have two of the same sign right next to each other. What did I say that happens whenever we have two identical signs next to each other? Absolutely. Those two signs combine to form a plus or addition or a positive. And it would actually be 5 plus 3. Because what happens when we subtract a negative number is it kind of like we're taking away that deficit. It's kind of like saying, oh, you have a $45 monthly phone bill that you have to pay? Let me take that away from you. You don't have to worry about that anymore. And it's like, cool, I'm actually kind of adding. I'm saving $45 a month. That's $45 more dollars that's going to be added into my amount of money that I have, or my bank, whatever. So that's the idea behind subtracting a negative, is it actually turns into a plus. A mnemonic device, or like a little rhyme that I like to use, is the two minus signs combine to form a plus sign. There's a lot of rhyming. The two lines combine to form a plus sign. That's what I say. I messed up my own mnemonic device. I'm so sorry. But the two lines combine to form a plus sign. There you go. But that's the idea. If we are adding a positive and a negative, then it ends up being subtraction. If we are subtracting a negative, we end up adding. This same idea transfers over to multiplication and division in a way. Let's say we have a multiplication problem. 5 times -3. Now you may be saying, well, we were talking about similar signs before. Do we have 2 of the same sign or 2 of different sign? Now that was whenever we were working with adding and subtracting. We had that plus sign or that minus sign in between the numbers. Here, of course, we have a multiplication sign. So we're going to be working with a little bit something different, but the same idea. You want to look at, is each number positive or negative? So this 5, positive or negative? Well, it's a positive number. This -3, it's in its name, right? It's negative. So what occurs is if when you are multiplying, and this goes for dividing as well, if your numbers are of 2 different signs, then that means your answer is going to be negative every time. No matter if the negative comes first in the positive or vice versa, however it looks, if the 2 numbers are different signs, then guaranteed you will have a negative answer. So what I personally like to do is I like to just think 5 and 3. Those are my actual numbers, right? Let me multiply those. Well, 5 times 3 is 15. And then since they're different signs, I know it's going to be a -15. That's going to be my final answer. This something similar happens with division. If we have numbers like, I don't know, 10 divided by -2. I'm using a fraction sign for divide, but it could be a division sign, however you want to look at it. Since they are different signs, that is a +10 and a -2, different signs means we are going to have a negative answer. We can just divide 10 by 2 like we regularly would. 10 divided by 2 is 5, so I get to write a 5 by that negative, and I discover -5 is my final answer. The last thing I want to talk about with multiplication and division is what if we have 2 negative numbers? What if we have -9 times -4? Well, what did I say about when we have 2 of the same sign, right? We said that when there's 2 different signs, it's always negative. But when there's 2 of the same sign, because see, check this out, both of these are negative, -9 and -4. When you have 2 of the same sign, the answer will always be positive, 100% of the time. Whether it's 2 negatives or 2 positive numbers, as long as they have the same sign, the answer will be positive. So 9 times 4 gets me 36, and I know it's going to be a positive 36 because they're both negative, because they both have the same sign. This exact same idea applies to division as well. So really, what you want to think about, the golden rule of operations with negatives, is if you are working with the same signs, whether that be positive, or negative, then your answer will always be positive. In that same vein, if you are adding a positive number or subtracting a negative number, you are always going to add, or you're always going to use a plus sign. So that same idea transfers, you just have to know how that works, what signs we're looking for. If you have different signs, such as a positive and a negative, or a negative and a positive, then it will always be negative. So this, primarily that rule is how we think about multiplication and division. If it's a positive and a negative number you're multiplying or dividing, the answer will be negative. But it also works for addition and subtraction. If you are adding a negative, then truthfully what you are doing is you're going to use a minus sign. If you are subtracting a positive, well, still, you're just subtracting. You're going to keep that minus sign, right? So this is kind of our golden rules of operations involving negatives. If you have any questions about this, drop them below. I'll be more than happy to help out. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys.